Now, the ongoing conflict between the Ukraine and Russia has also affected economies throughout the globe with sanctions imposed against Russia. But perhaps for more on this, let's bring in Chief Business Development Officer Annaline van der Poel. Annaline, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us here on the SABC.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me.
We're seeing the precarious economic situation, both locally, but also obviously being impacted by international factors. And I wonder if you could speak to what those contributing factors are on both a micro and macro level as food and gasoline prices continue to soar.
Liesl, I think you've summed it up very well. One of the biggest impacts we are obviously seeing right now, direct and indirect, has obviously been the fuel price. So we've seen a slight reduction, and we might have another one on the cards at the beginning of September, which obviously still needs to be finalized. The reality is where we stand right now, as at the beginning of August versus August 2021, that's a 38% year-on-year fuel price increase that consumers have had to, work into their budgets. And that's just on the direct impact, being obviously on their transport costs, fuel for their vehicles, etc. Indirect, obviously, we know that this goes straight into the cost of goods that we buy in the stores because the bulk of stuff in South Africa gets transported by road. So as the transport costs go up, our goods costs will go up as well. And then the other side, we've got inflation. We know we've got a very, very high inflation rates, and the Reserve Bank has set that target of 3 to 6%. We're above it now. And how the Reserve Bank deals with that is increasing interest. So if you have debt to boot, your interest, your interest gone up and your debt has just become more expensive. So a multitude of factors having a very, very big impact on consumer budgets every month.
Annaline, how is this going to impact investor confidence for emerging markets like South Africa? And when we also look at, what the country's done, in July, South Africa delivered its biggest increase in borrowing costs in almost 2 decades. And signaled a faster pace of hikes throughout the year. And I'm asking this because, some of the view that this could be an attempt by the central bank to mitigate against some of the, challenges that might come down the line. I wonder if this is effective enough as we're speaking for future to mitigate against what's happening in the future. How would you weigh in on that?
Look, it's very difficult to say. I'm obviously not an economist, and we'd hope that government knows well, have great ideas here for us for the future. The reality is, obviously, if our interest rates increase, in theory, if you're an investor, that makes it more attractive because obviously, you can get more return on investment. But interest rates are not the only thing people obviously look at. We've got a bunch of factors we need to look at. What is the growth outlook for the country? What is the economic stability as a whole, and so forth. So I'm sure that this is a good thing to look at, but I think in the greater scheme, it does consist of quite a bunch of factors, and they all have to play together for us to be considered a viable investment option.
Well, with that said, in the week or the coming week, South Africa's biggest labor union federation and its affiliates will stage a national strike on the 24th to protest against these rising costs of fuel and food and also continued power cuts. And I wonder, given the state of the economy, the crisis that the economy is in right now, how will embarking on such strikes perhaps destabilize the country even more? How would you weigh in terms of its impact?
Look, it's a very difficult situation because, on the one hand, we really do understand why, what consumers are going through. As you've just mentioned, the PMB-EJD feedback has painted the very bleak picture of how difficult it really is there in terms of what the consumer budget looks like and what their basket of expenditure is. So you can understand that there is a lot of frustration currently out there. And obviously the intention is to make sure the government hears that frustration and takes serious steps and serious action to assist consumers. But yes, on the other hand, as you've mentioned, it could potentially, depending on how it goes, it could affect their possible investor confidence as well. So it is a very, very difficult path that's currently being faced out there in terms of how do we deal with the situation that we're facing.
Yeah, and then just perhaps in conclusion, because we have to look at the policies in place and how they impact, the broader society, given the systemic issues of triple threats of poverty, unemployment and inequality, amongst other issues that we're grappling with. How do we also need to begin to address this to soldier forward? I mean, it's all fair and well to be looking at what's happening now, but if we don't get to the root of the issue, we're going to continue these conversations year in, year out.
Indeed, indeed. And I think we need to go back to the discussions that have been had in the past years, specifically around employment creation. That's probably the biggest problem that we are sitting with right now, which is, it's where everything starts. If you don't have a job, you don't have money. If you don't have money, how are you going to buy stuff? If we look at the grant systems, I mean, obviously it assists, but it's not enough to cover living expenses. So we need to go back to the drawing board. We really need government to sit down and make sure that we've got an environment that's conducive to investment for small businesses, entrepreneurs to start businesses whereby they can go and employ people, removing red tape. There's a myriad of things that need to be looked at, but I do think the starting ground needs to be making sure that we focus on job creation. Our unemployment rate is too high. It doesn't, it cannot sustain consumers. Our tax-paying base is too low. There's too much that needs to be carried by a very small number. We need to make sure that we focus on job creation and ensure that more people become employed.
Annaline van der Poel, thank you very much for joining us here on the SABC. Annaline was just speaking about the growth outlook of the country, given the socio-economic challenges that it continues to face, this ahead of the national strike that is set to take place on the 24th of August this year. We are going to also be speaking to